story that I'm writing that I thought some of you might like to hear. Perhaps only one of my friends will listen. I'll send them the link. But for those of you who do find this, I hope you enjoy it. I'm not done yet, so this will be in several installments as I continue to write and work through it. At this point, I don't have a title, other than maybe like Ren's story that I can put her up on YouTube so people know what they're looking at or looking for. So, we'll start. Coneheads was busy. The sounds of pleasant chatter and noisy slurping filled local ice cream joint on the last Saturday before school started. The corner booth was filled with its usual high school guys. "Shove over, Paul," said one of the boys, a junior with broad shoulders and short dark hair. "Here comes Ren." Paul moved over in the red booth to make room for the boy who had just entered. Ren glanced around, heard his friends call his name, ambled over and slid in next to Paul. The others all reached over him, shook his hand, or slapped him on the shoulder. Ren smiled at his friends. "So, how was nerd camp?" asked Travis, the broad-shouldered boy. "Nerd camp?" asked Ren, putting on a puzzled expression. "Duh, nerd camp," reiterated Travis. "What else do you call a summer camp where you learn sword play and all that medieval stuff?" "You're just jealous," said Paul. "You wish you could have gone instead of working for your dad." Travis shrugged and gave up. "Well," said James, a blond boy wearing a tie-dyed t-shirt, "tell us, we haven't seen you all summer." Ren shrugged. "It was a lot of fun." Then he grinned. "I bet I can whip any of you guys now with any weapon. Not if I have a gun," said Travis cockily. "He means medieval weapons, you dolt," said James. I know, said Travis. "I'm just giving him crap." He looked at Ren. "So, Rennie, what'd you learn?" "Chocolate dipped cone, please," said Ren to the waitress who had just come to the table. Then he turned back to his friends. His eyes lit up. "Broadsword, dagger fighting, quarterstaff, cudgel, jousting, tilting. It was awesome. But I didn't get very good at the jousting or tilting," he ended with a slight grimace, rubbing his left shoulder just below the collarbone. Paul finished slurping his shake and said, "When are you going to teach us? School starts Monday. I'm sure we can grab some swords from the drama department." "Sure," agreed Travis, "but a sword is no match for a good gun." "Nice, Han Solo," said James. "Have you no love of history?" "It's all right," said Travis, "but I'd rather learn cudgel fighting than sword, and I can make a cudgel in shop class." For the next hour or so the conversation continued, but slowly moved away from Ren's experience to what the others had been doing. Ren listened half-heartedly, with that strange realization that life goes on without you, and that even if you had a good summer, you can still half wish you'd been with your friends. Eventually he was completely out of the conversation, rose and left, just nodding a farewell. Garwin was a small town of about 5,000 inhabitants, most of whom lived between the hill on the west and the woods on the east. Recently houses had been built up the hill, and a couple had started on the west side of the hill. Garwin Creek and the short-run railroad track made an X through town, the creek running from northwest to southeast, and the track running from southwest to northeast. Main Street ran more or less north-south, and the other roads followed an organized grid pattern as much as possible, given the contours of the hill and the creek. Outside town was open farmland with some stands of trees and groves that had been left standing. Ren walked the 2 blocks from Coneheads to his house. His friends preferred their cars and getting from point to point as quickly as possible. They didn't understand Ren's love of walking and the extra time it took to get places. Monday, school started, and after his summer away, he needed more time to think about his final year of high school. He had just flopped down on his bed and was staring at his half-unpacked suitcase when his phone rang. "Hello, this is Ren." "Hey, Ren!" It was James' voice. "You left before we could tell you about tonight." "Oh?" said Ren, smoothing out the wrinkles in his sheets. "What's going on tonight?" "New movie. You want to come?" "I don't know. I gotta unpack some more." "Dude, the movie's right down your alley. You gotta come. It's called Night. Like a pun on night and night. You know, like nighttime and the medieval soldier. K-N-I-H-T. The trailers look awesome. You haven't heard of it?" "No," said Ren. "I've been gone all summer." Yeah, but oh right, medieval camper, or whatever it was, period accurate, wasn't it? Yes. No cell phones, no electricity, no nothing modern. Wow, but you gotta come. I'm telling you, you'll love it. Okay, I'll be there, said Ren. What time? 7 o'clock. See you then. Click. Ren put his phone down next to him and sighed. He appreciated the invitation, but after a summer at a historically accurate medieval nerd camp, as Travis called it, he wondered how well he would appreciate another Hollywoodized version of the Middle Ages. He sat up and slid off the bed to unpack before supper. Soon he was humming along to the Gypsy Gorilla Band on his stereo while he put clothes and weapons away. There was a short line outside the theater when Wren arrived. Travis, James, Paul were already there. What, said Travis, not in costume for the movie? Wren shook his head. Believe it or not, it feels good to wear jeans again. What's this movie about? I don't know, said Paul. Trailers never tell you the plot. Just a bunch of cool shots. Something with swords and knights and a castle. We figured you'd like it. Cool, said Wren. Do you know the time period, or is it general fantasy? Looks like the 1200s, said James, judging from the armor in the trailer. Either way, it looks good, said Travis. The doors opened. The boys paid, went in, and found their favorite seats, about 4 rows back from the front, right in the middle of the row. After the commercials for local businesses and what seemed like 15 previews for upcoming movies, the feature finally started. From the black screen, slowly a picture came into view, an aerial picture of a forested countryside at night. In the distance, Wren heard a horse galloping. The camera angle slowly zoomed in as the hoofbeats grew louder. Suddenly the road filled the screen, the angle changed, and the pounding hoofs were kicking up mud. Wren saw the flank of the horse, the booted feet and legs of the knight, and then the full figure of a man, his mail glittering in the moonlight as he leaned over his steed's neck, urging him to more speed. Just ahead lay the castle. "Open the gate! Open the gate for Sir Edric!" called the man on a parapet. The portcullis was raised and the gate opened as Sir Edric thundered into the courtyard. He pulled the reins to halt his steed, slipped off his back, and strode into the castle, his left hand on the hilt of the sword. The word Knight, Knight, appeared on the screen in black Gothic letters, and the credits followed. The movie was good. Tension, plot, counterplot, betrayal, swords were swung, bold battle was joined, siege was set. Sir Edric strode into the lord's chamber. "My lord," he said, placing his right fist over his heart and bowing his head. "Speak, Sir Edric." "My lord, the enemy has set a siege against us sooner than we imagined, although many of our folk have, my bad, have reached our walls and are sheltered within. My family has not arrived. I beg permission to seek them and bring them to safety, here or elsewhere." "You have leave to go. Return as soon as you can. I trust you have a plan to get past the siege?" "Yes, my lord." "Then go to see your family." Edric bowed again and hastily exited. Taking his horse, he made his way to the guard tower he knew had a secret passage. The passage ran under the moat and the open field to the edge of the forest. There it emerged. Once out of the passage, Edric mounted his horse and anxiously rode towards home. Ren and his friends sat rooted to their seats. Out of the corner of his eye, Ren could see Paul fidgeting with his fingers. As Edric neared his home, Ren could feel his own breath growing shallower. Smoke rose from more than just the chimney. Flames suddenly leaped from the windows. Men's shapes could be seen all around the house. Ren gripped the arms of his seat. Edric dismounted and fought his way to the door. He threw it open, sword still in hand. Ren left. He was shaking. He slumped against a wall in the hallway and stared at the floor. He felt tears on his face. His friends would never understand. Why should he cry during a movie? Maybe he'd tell them he had to go to the bathroom. For the next 20 minutes, he sat, shaking, trying to compose himself. Then the movie was over. He could hear music from the end credits, and people started coming out. He picked himself up, wiped his eyes against his sleeve, and waited for his friends. Monday morning, Ren woke up, pulled his jeans on, grabbed a t-shirt, buckled on his sword, and went downstairs for breakfast. "Eric," his mom still used his real name, "you won't need your sword at school." "What?" "Oh, yeah." He unbuckled it and hung it on his chair, then sat down at the table. After a swallow of orange juice, he said, "Mom, Yes, sir? I've been thinking a lot about school. Yes? What about it? Seems like forever since I was in school. It'll be strange going back. Well, you were gone all summer and living without any connection to us here in town. I can understand things being a bit strange. But don't worry, you'll do all right. You'll adjust. She smiled, especially if you can remember to leave that sword at home whenever you leave the house. Thanks, Mom. I just hope readjusting doesn't take too long. School went smoothly for the morning. Assembly was the usual welcome and pep talk about working hard at the start and getting a good tone for the rest of the year. A couple new kids were made to stand up and be introduced. Classes were all handing out books and going through rules and expectations. A couple seemed like they'd be interesting. He was looking forward to Brit Lit, which met after lunch, but he had to survive chemistry first. Finally the bell rang, and the hallway was filled with a stampede of hungry teens headed for the cafeteria. Lunch was chicken patties and french fries. Travis, James, Paul, and Wren grabbed cartoned milk from the cooler and sat down at a long table. Other kids were scattered around, grouped with their friends. Freshmen and new kids looked lost, wondering where they would sit and which tables had invisible reserved signs on them. A new girl with long blonde hair sat down at the table to Wren's left and pulled a book out of her backpack. She removed the bookmark and started reading, holding the book with her left hand and slowly eating her food with her right. "She's pretty," said James to the others in a low voice. They all nodded and glanced her way. "Uh-oh," said Paul, nodding his head toward a well-muscled boy who was approaching the new girl's table. "What's Levi Ethan up to now?" The others shrugged and watched. Leviathan, Levi Ethan, as Wren and his friends had nicknamed him, put his tray down and sat across from the blonde girl. "You can't read now," he said. "It's lunchtime. No books in the caf." The girl ignored him. "What's the book anyway?" he said, tilting his head down to see the title. "The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Are you kidding me? Maybe you should go back to elementary school." He pulled the book from her hand and stood, held it out of her reach. His friends had joined him by now. "Check it out, guys. The new girl reads kids' books. Listen to this."
"Here we are," said Mr. Beaver, "and it looks as if Mrs. Beaver is expecting us."
He smirked. "Yes, my friends, new girl here is reading kids' books about talking animals, and doing it at our table. An adult table." He looked at the girl. "We'll let you sit with us at our table, but I'll have to keep the book, since this table is for adults only." Wren rose indignantly from his seat. "Give the book back, Levi, and it's not your table." "Wren?" laughed Levi. "Mr. Medieval Man? What will you do, Sir Nerd?" He still held the book out of reach. "Return the book to the maiden," insisted Wren, his right hand straying to his left hip. A crowd had gathered, and the wrestling coach noticed. He walked over and saw Levi holding the book, Wren facing him down, and the new girl watching the action around her. Wren's hand found no sword. He lowered it. "What's going on here, Levi?" asked the coach, Mr. Brand. "Show me the book you just handed Mike." Levi held the book out. Mr. Brand took it. Good book. I assume it's not yours, Levi, is it?" Levi said nothing. "Is it?" repeated Mr. Brand. "No, sir." "Whose is it?" "New girl," muttered Levi. "What?" said the coach. "New girl," said Levi a bit louder. "I thought so," said Mr. Brand, returning the book. "Now, the bell is about to ring. All of you get to class. And Levi, this is not a good way to start your senior year." As the crowd dispersed, Wren heard Levi mutter, "Whatever. In a year I'll be out of this stupid place anyway." Wren turned to the new girl, who had risen from her seat and was putting the book back into her backpack. "Ignore him," he told her. "He's a varlet." "Truly," she responded with a slight grin. "With rude, churlish behavior. My name is Lynette." She held out her hand. "Everyone calls me Wren," he said. "Honored to meet you." He took her hand and kissed it, bowing slightly. "Can you tell me where Brit Lit is?" she asked. "Just follow us," said James. "That's where we're going." He led the way. Travis stepped up beside Wren.
"Hey, what's with that whole hand-kissing honored to meet you stuff? You're not at nerd camp anymore, you know."
"Yeah," said Paul on Wren's other side. "She's pretty and all, but lay off the medieval romance stuff. You'll scare her." Wren shrugged. He hadn't really noticed until his friends mentioned it. Mr. Dietrich greeted each student as they walked into the room. Wren! He shook Wren's forearm. How was summer camp? Pretty good, sir, answered Wren with a bit of a grin. And who is this young lady? He extended his hand to Lynette. Eowyn of Rohan, or perhaps Sif of Asgard? Lynette shook her head and smiled. Neither, sir, although I thank you for the compliments. I am Lynette Taylor. Pleased to meet you. Please find a seat and make yourself to class. Wren, Lynette, Paul, James, and Travis took seats toward the front of the room, but off to one side. When the bell rang, Mr. Dietrich handed out some papers, ran very quickly through the class rules and expectations, almost in a monotone. Then suddenly he straightened up and loudly cried out, What? Some students jumped. We gardena en jardago, theod kuniga fremgefrunon. Most students looked confused. Wren and Lynette grinned. Travis, James, and Paul shifted in their seats, waiting for more. Beowulf, said Mr. Dietrich, the oldest poem and story in the English language. Wait, said a student, that was English? Wren and his friends thoroughly enjoyed the rest of the class period. The next day at lunch, they waved Lynette over to their table. She sat down, and three other girls approached the table. Where were you three yesterday? Asked Paul, stabbing his baked potato with his fork. We were here, said the tall, auburn-haired girl. You saw us in class. Yeah, I know, Kelly, said Paul, but why didn't you sit by us for lunch? Yeah, repeated James, after swallowing a mouthful of milk from the carton. And why weren't you at the movie Saturday night? We told you about it. Kelly and the other two girls sat down. Yesterday we had a heart-to-heart, said Kelly. Girl problems, said Travis. Whatever, said the blonde girl, rolling her eyes. What about the movie? Repeated James. Erin was out of town at her grandma's house, said Kelly. The blonde girl nodded. So because Erin was gone, none of you could come? Asked Wren. The girls looked at each other as though this were a really dumb question. Wren shook his hand and then indicated Lynette. Ladies, this is Lynette. Lynette, this is Kelly, Erin, and Shannara. Welcome to the fantasy table, said Erin. Thank you, said Lynette. Then she turned to James. What movie were you talking about? Night, said James. It was awesome. Yeah, but Wren left at the best part, said Travis, right at the climax, and he missed the end of the movie. Why'd you leave if the movie was as good as the guys say? Asked Shannara. Wren shrugged and took a drink. Too much coke, I guess. He put on a grin and hoped they wouldn't ask more. You're not 5 anymore, said Travis. You shouldn't have to leave for the bathroom whenever a movie gets exciting. I mean, Edric was just going to bust down the door and lay waste to the bad guys, and Wren walks out. Travis shook his head and took another bite of food. So, Lynette, said Kelly, where are you from? A lot of places, answered Lynette. Right now I'm from Maple Avenue. Maple Avenue? Where on Maple? Asked Shannara. Across from the woods, answered Lynette. That's not far from Wren's house, said Paul, nudging Wren with his elbow. Your gallant hero from yesterday dwelleth nigh. The others laughed while Wren and Lynette tried to ignore them. The bell saved them, and they all left for Britlit and more Beowulf. Mom, said Wren, walking into the kitchen and dropping his backpack on the floor. What's up with my friends? What do you mean? Asked his mom. Just name a tour, said Wren, sitting down at the table and putting his head in his hands. They act like a bunch of teenagers. Eric, said his mom, they are teenagers, and so are you. Yeah, said Wren, I guess that sounded pretty dumb. Yes, it did, said his mom. Was there something particular? Yesterday I stood up to Levi for picking on a new girl. Now Paul seems to think she should be my girlfriend. Well, is she nice? Wren let out a sigh of exasperation. I'm kidding, said his mom, but Paul was just teasing you. That's just Paul. Why sweat it? I'm just not ready for a girlfriend yet, responded Wren. Not this soon. Soon? Asked his mom. What do you mean soon? Wren muttered. He rose from the table, picked up his backpack, and went to his room. A couple of minutes later, he slipped out the back door, his sword buckled on, and crossed the backyard and disappeared into the woods. A narrow trail led him for a ways, twisting and turning a bit before opening into a small clearing. To one side of the clearing was a small hill with a door in it. He opened the door. It was good to be back at his old fort. He smiled as that word came to his mind. Fort. Like when he was a kid. His dad had built it for him and his friends. After reading The Hobbit, they had piled dirt around it and let grass grow there. He opened the door, entered, sat in an old chair. Fort. Strength. He didn't know what it meant when he was little, he just knew that forts were cool. Now he knew more and supposed that old, small place was still his fort. His playing had ceased, but the fort remained a place of solitude, a place to think, a place to regain strength, and a place to let out stress. He rose, drew his sword, and went outside, took a deep breath, and started his sword fighting routine. Felt good. It had been a couple days. He would have to make sure he practiced every day to stay in shape. The problem was that he would need a sparring partner. He paused and wiped his brow. A slight rustle sounded from his left. He spun into the on-guard position. "Who goes there? Present yourself." A girl in dark jeans and a green t-shirt stepped into the clearing. It was Lynette. Ren lowered his blade. "Where'd you learn swordplay?" asked Lynette. "I started by watching videos a long time ago. There weren't any classes around here. This summer I went to a medieval camp and learned more." "You learned to be that good in 2.5 months?" Lynette was surprised. "It's the Narnian air," quipped Ren. Lynette laughed. "So what's this little hobbit hole place?" she asked. She passed him and stood by the door. Ren didn't move. "Wait, why are you here anyway?" "I like woods, so I decided to explore these. I didn't expect to see a hobbit hole." "It's my fort," said Ren hesitantly, hoping that didn't sound too childish. "Cool, can I go in?" "Yeah, yes. Pardon me for forgetting my manners. Please enter." He opened the door for her and they went inside. She looked around at a couple old chairs, some fantasy posters, wooden swords, and a bookshelf with figures and books. "Is this just yours?" "Not really. Paul and James and Travis and I all worked out on it together, but they don't come here much anymore. We mostly meet at Coneheads or the Wired Possum." "The Wired Possum?" "Yeah, the cafe on the north side of town. You'll have to come sometime." They fell silent. After a while, Lynette rose and walked to the door. She turned. Ren had risen from his chair. "Kind sir," she said, "might I return to this place for silence and thought?" "As thou wilt," said Ren, opening the door for her. "I wilt not. I bloom in beauty," grinned Lynette as she stepped outside. Ren grinned back. "Clever, quick, and true," he said. Lynette mimed a curtsy. "Thank you, kind sir. I will see you on the morrow." Ren inclined his head. "On the morrow, milady." When she had gone, he went through some sword exercises and then went home for supper. The food was on the table when he entered, so he seated himself next to his little brother, unconsciously arranging his sword to the most convenient and comfortable position. Neither parent said anything about the weapon. Ren had been coming to meals with swords, wooden at first, since he was a small child. At that point, they figured it was a phase he would outgrow. Conversation centered on school, work, and daily routine, as well as the latest rumors and news from around town. Ren mainly ignored it. It seemed trivial when he was lost in his own thoughts. They wandered from memories of nerd camp, to school, to Beowulf, to who could be his sparring partner. Eventually supper was over and he went up to his room. He stood in the doorway and glanced around. It still looked a bit strange to him after being gone so long. The mattress was on his bed to the left, not the thin goose-down mattress he had become accustomed to. The windows opposite him looked out onto the front yard and the paved road rather than a dirt track in a forest. The walls were not planks and beams, but drywall decorated with posters. He shook his head. Home was not as much home as it had been. He crossed the room at an angle, sat at his desk, and stared out the window at a squirrel for a couple minutes. When he finally opened his science book, his phone buzzed. He looked around. Buzzing was odd. He broke out of his reverie, remembering what the sound meant, and picked up the phone. It was Paul. "Hey, Ren, we're gonna go do our homework at the Wired Possum. You coming?" Yeah, sure, I'll be there in a minute. You gonna invite that new girl, Lynette?" "I don't have her number," said Ren. "Walk to her house, dude," said Paul. "She lives around the corner from you." "Maybe," said Ren, staring out the window at the forest that only existed in his memory. "I'll see you guys in 20 minutes." "See you then," said Paul, and hung up. Ren remained at his desk for a bit, toying with the idea of inviting Lynette. He decided against it. He wasn't up for his friend's immature joking, and he was simply being hospitable. I'm going to the Wired Possum, he called out to his parents as he left. I'll return about halfway through the second watch. He closed the door and headed down the street. At the corner, he jaywalked across the intersection, cut through the park, and then turned right on School Street. He was about a block from the Wired Possum when he heard a car pulling up slowly behind him. He felt his muscles tense, but he kept walking, reminding himself that in a small town like Garwin, he was unlikely to get attacked, regardless of what his muscles told him. The car pulled up next to him and drove alongside. It was the sheriff. He buzzed the automatic window down, leaned over and called out, "Ren!" Ren stopped. "Yes, Officer Brand?" "You probably shouldn't be wearing that sword around town." "What?" "Your sword." "Oh!" Ren suddenly realized he had never unbuckled his sword after practicing. "Sorry, I didn't notice." "Ren," said Officer Brand, "it's not a wooden sword, and you're not in grade school anymore. Where are you going anyway?" "The Wired Possum." "I'll tell you what. You give me the sword, I'll drop it off at your house. Just don't do this again. You're a good kid and I trust you, but still." Ren unbuckled his sword and handed it through the open car window. "Thanks. See you around," said Officer Brand and drove off. Ren continued on towards the Wired Possum. "Kid," rankled inside him. How could Brand call him kid? He wasn't a kid anymore. He could handle the sword and a lot else besides. He shook his head to get rid of the thoughts and stepped up his pace. The Wired Possum wasn't very busy. Then again, it was only Tuesday night. A couple grandfathers were at a table in a corner. The banker was sitting by himself in khakis and a polo shirt. Several others from town were scattered about in some booths. Ren's friends were on their usual corner couch, their drinks on a coffee table in front of them. Travis waved, and Ren walked over and sat down. Travis dropped his English text on Ren's lap. "I think the story's pretty cool, but I don't get the poetry." "Beowulf?" asked Ren. "Yup," answered Travis. "Listen to the rhythm," said Ren, and read a couple lines. They spent the next couple hours studying various subjects together and talking about future plans for after high school. Night came up several times, but Ren managed to evade questions about why he had left and stuck mainly to commenting on the arms and armor in the movie. He made it home by 10:30. His dad was sitting on the couch with the sword leaning up next to him. "Ren!" "Yes, Dad?" "Officer Brand dropped this off." "Yes, I know." "Why were you wearing a sword to go to the Wired Possum?" "I forgot I had it on. I had it on from practice before supper. I just forgot." "Ren," said his dad, shaking his head, "you've got to pay more attention. You're not at that medieval camp anymore. You're lucky Officer Brand let you off the hook this time." "It's not illegal, Dad." "Then why did Officer Brand take it from you?" "He didn't. He said it was a good idea not to wear it in public. People might get worried. So I let him have it to take it home. Besides, Mrs. Finnick at the Possum doesn't like weapons. It was easier this way." "Okay, Ren," said his dad, "it may not be illegal to wear it in public, but I, as your dad, am telling you not to wear it in public unless you have a specific reason. You're 17, you're not a warrior, even if you did learn a lot at camp." He held the sword out to Ren. "Yes, sir," said Ren, accepted his sword back, and went up to bed. Late that night he woke up in a cold sweat, feeling for the dagger he kept under his pillow. He lay awake for a while, praying not to fall asleep back into the same dream that had wakened him. Morning came, found him waking, his hand still gripping the dagger. He let go and sat up, pulled on his jeans, and rubbed his hands over his face, blinking his eyes. He shrugged on a dragon t-shirt and went downstairs. "Toast?" asked his mom as he sat down. "Yes, please." She dropped a couple slices of bread into the toaster and then turned to look at him. "Are you okay?" "What? Are you okay?" "Yeah, why?" You were staring blankly as though something was bothering you. "I had a bad dream last night. I don't remember it, but the motions are lingering." "Bad dream, huh?" said his dad, buttoning a plaid shirt as he came in. "I used to get those a lot. Want to talk about it?" Ren shook his head and took the toast his mom offered. "I don't remember enough of it." He finished his breakfast in silence while his family chatted about their coming day. Then, swallowing the last bite, he rose, put his plate on the counter, and went upstairs for his backpack. In his room, he looked around for a minute, still trying to shake the emotions of the dream. The sheets were still mussed up, so he pulled them tight up to his pillow. His blue eyes lingered on the dagger, but he knew he shouldn't wear it to school. He decided to pull his hair back. As he did so, he felt the earring he had worn all summer at nerd camp. He took it out and looked at it. It was a narrow silver leaf. The thin raised veins glinted just a bit, and then he laid it on the dresser. It was torn. Medieval camp had meant a lot to him. He had formed new relationships, learned new skills, developed new habits. It was hard to let go. He wasn't sure he wanted to, and yet he couldn't go through life wearing a sword. What about the earring he had just taken out? No one had noticed it yet because he kept his hair down. But how would he explain its significance? How could he tell his friends what he had gone through to earn it? And all that in one summer? He picked up the earring, then put it down again. He grabbed his backpack, slung it on, went downstairs and out the front door. At the sidewalk, he glanced left and saw Lynette just rounding the corner. He waited for her. "Morning, m'lady," he said when she reached him. "Good morning, kind sir," she responded. Her blonde hair was braided, and she wore a gray peasant blouse with a dark green skirt. "Why walkest thou?" she continued. "Hast thou no car?" She faltered and grinned on the last word. Wren fell in step with her, moving to the street side, as his father had taught him. "I prefer walking," he shrugged. "'Tis pleasant weather, the stride feeleth good in my legs, and I know better my surroundings. Moreover, 'tis a vain use of gas to drive 2 blocks." Lynette smiled back. "How often goest thou to thy fort in the woods?" "This summer I went not at all, being elsewhere, but I shall be frequenting my fort daily after school for thought and sword practice." "It bothers you not at all that I should visit?" "Not a whit, as long as thou speakest not when I am in deep thought." "How will I know?" she asked. "I will look like this," he answered, trying to look seriously and gravely stroking his chin. She laughed. "All right, great wizard philosopher, when you look like this, I will leave you to your grand contemplations." Wren laughed. A few paces later, Lynette said, "The other day you mentioned the wired possum. Why is it called that? I mean, I get the wired part for a coffee place, but why possum?" "Actually, the wired part has nothing to do with coffee." "Really?" "The building was a schoolhouse back in the day. There were 2 rooms. I think one for older kids and one for the younger ones. It lasted long enough for electricity to be brought in, but closed shortly after that, and they built the bigger school in town. Anyway, Mr. and Mrs. Finnick bought it about 15 years ago. Story is that when they went in to check it out the first time, a possum had chewed into some old wiring and electrocuted itself. Thus, the wired possum." "So wired isn't caffeine," said Lynette, shaking her head. "Nope," said Wren. "Mr. Possum got zapped." Lynette laughed. "Great story." Travis and James pulled into the parking lot just as Lynette and Wren crossed onto school grounds. They waved, and Travis and James waved back and hollered something over the loudness of the car radio. Morning classes went smoothly, and everyone seemed to be getting into the swing of the new school year. In classes without assigned seating, a couple students were still rushing to get to their seat, or squabbling about whose seat it was. The chatters were already chatting, some quietly and some not so quietly. Teachers were working to enforce the rules and not smile till November. Wren shook his head and wished everyone would just listen and learn. Even his friends seemed not to care as much. At lunch, Leviathan walked slowly past their table but moved on. James took the others. Looked like he was trying to come up with a good insult. "Yeah," said Travis, "but Lynette isn't reading her book this time." "Either that or Wren scared him," said Paul. "I doubt it," responded Wren after a swallow of chocolate milk. "Mr. Brand got on his case." "Yeah, but I think you surprised him," said Paul, and the others nodded. "You didn't used to stand up like that. You mostly got upset around us and talked about it, but you never did much." "You surprised me," said Travis. "You must have gotten all knightly at nerd camp this summer." "We were surprised too," said Shannara. "You never defended us like that," added Aaron. Kelly nodded. Wren shifted a bit. "I beg pardon, ladies," he said, rising. "Please trust that from henceforth I shall do my best to defend your honor." He bowed slightly and reseated himself. The girls, except for Lynette, looked at him a bit quizzically. "Thanks," said Shannara after a pause, then laughingly, "We'll hold you to that." "You know," said Aaron, "I've always wondered about women who have no honor. I mean, knights vowed to defend a woman's honor, or women's honor, but did they ever defend a dishonorable woman?" If they were in love with her, they probably would, said James. Yeah, but what if some night we're riding through the woods and came upon a strumpet in need of defense? What then? Does he defend her or just ride on his way, figuring that her shameful, dishonorable ways have brought just punishment on her? I don't care what instrument a woman plays, said Travis. A true knight should take down her attacker. Dude, Travis, said Paul. Strumpet means prostitute. Oh, said Travis while the others laughed. My bad. Don't sweat it, said Paul, clapping him on the back. Not everyone can know 13 gazillion old-time words for prostitute. I'm still wondering, said Aaron. Would a knight defend the honor of a woman who had no honor? There was silence as the group mulled over the question. Lynette spoke. I think King Edmund or High King Peter would, they all agreed. Maybe Gawain or Galahad, added Kelly. Okay, but bring it to now, said Shannara. Would you guys? Would we what? Asked James. Would you guys defend the honor of a dishonorable woman? James, Travis, and Paul stared at the table and muttered. Guess so, I suppose. The bell rang. Wren rose, looked the girls in the eye, and said, I would. I've done it before. I'd do it again. The others rose and picked up their trays. Do you mean Lynette? Whispered James. No, whispered back Wren. This summer. Oh, said James. Mr. Dietrich greeted each student at the door, as usual, and when all were seated, began. Good after lunch, class. I can see you're eager to get more out of Beowulf, or maybe to go to sleep, but since sleep is not an option, Beowulf it is. There were some groans from the students. Mr. Dietrich continued. Monday, we talked a bit about Beowulf's character and his history of heroic deeds, his resume, if you will. Yesterday, we talked about the battle with Grendel. Today, we'll talk about the fight with Grendel's mother. Grendel's mother sounds like a metal band, whispered Travis. Yes, it does, responded Mr. Dietrich, surprising Travis. They'd have to be some big, ugly dudes, though. Or women. Anyway, today we will talk about Grendel's mother, starting at about line 1425. I wish we could study Beowulf all semester, but we can't. So tomorrow, we'll deal with his battle with the dragon. Friday, we'll look at a poem called The Wanderer. First, in last night's reading, what did you think of Grendel's mother and her battle with Beowulf? Mean, nasty, evil, kind of like Steve's mom, said a guy towards the back. His friend Steve hit him. Gentlemen, said Mr. Dietrich, please save your aggression for real monsters, not each other, and don't insult ladies. Ren and his friends glanced at each other. Paul raised his hand. Mr. Dietrich, if a knight is supposed to respect and honor a lady, why did Beowulf kill Grendel's mother? I mean, I know she wasn't a lady, and she was not honorable, but what's the difference? Comments, anyone? Mr. Dietrich glanced around the room. Anyone want to answer Paul's question? The kids all stared at their books, except for Ren, who looked around the room. Picture this, said Mr. Dietrich. You are sleeping in your house with your family, and a woman breaks in and kills some of them. What do? You don't have guns, and there are no police. What would you do? That's different, said one student. How? Asked Mr. Dietrich. Grendel's mom was a demon monster. She wasn't human. Right? So what's the difference? Silence. Ren raised his hand. Ren, you've read this before. What do you want to say? Within the poem, the descendants of Cain cease to be human and become monsters, almost anti-humans. Humans have honor, monsters don't. Even a despicable human has the honor of being human. Monsters don't. The class nodded, and Mr. Dietrich went on with class. When the bell rang, he called out over the student scramble, Read the battle with the dragon for tomorrow. Line numbers are on your syllabus. In the hallway, Travis said, Tonight at the Wired Possum? I want Ren to read it to us aloud. It makes better sense that way. The others agreed and set a time for 7:30. The Wired Possum was quietly busy when Lynette and Ren entered. Travis, James, Aaron, and Shannara waved from their usual spot. Lynette and Ren walked over, and Ren dropped their books on the low table. Are the others coming? He asked. I think so, said James. Kelly said she's coming, said Aaron, moving over to make room for Lynette. So, tell us about defending the honor of a dishonorable woman, said James. All right now, said Ren. Why not? Ren shrugged. How about we wait till everyone's here, said James. Then you won't have to repeat it. All right, I guess, said Ren and went to order a chai. When he got back, Kelly and Paul were there. Another chair had been pulled up into the circle, and everyone was ready to begin. Ren put his mug on the little table, but remained standing. If I'm going to read this to you, I need to stand. opened his book. Are you all at line 2510? Good. Beowulf spoke, made his battle vows for the last time. He read through the battle, taking voices of characters, letting the lilt of lines and the rhythm of the words resound. When he finished, there was a general clapping from all the customers, and he suddenly realized that not only his friends had been paying attention to the story. He bowed slightly to his audience and sat down. Time for the worksheet, said Paul. No, said James, I want to hear how Wren defended the honor of this honorable woman. Yeah, said Aaron, me too. Give the guy a break, said Paul. He just finished talking. Don't make him go on. At least let him finish his chai. We got to do the worksheet before what we heard leaks out of our brains, said Travis. But after that, said James, he tells the story, finished Aaron. Agreed? Agreed, Aaron said. When the worksheet was finished, folded into their books, stuffed into their backpacks, they ordered more hot drinks and some cookies. James paid for Wren's. Settled back in their seats and looked expectantly at Wren. He sipped the foam off his chai and looked at his friends. It was the first time. He really had to tell them about camp, but he was reluctant, especially when he would be seen as the hero of the tale. He took a deep breath and sighed. Background. The camp is laid out like a small medieval village. People there for the summer learn various trades, live with the trade masters. There is, of course, an inn or pub where we could get drinks. Alcohol? Asked Paul in a concerned voice. Not for everyone, answered Wren. I went to the pub one night to get a drink and meet some friends. When I arrived, there was a young lady outside, about your age, he nodded towards Kelly. I'm the same age as you are, she said. Right, said Wren. Anyway, there were rumors about this young lady's weekend dalliances, and some young ruffians had gathered round her. Was she hot? Asked Travis. Shannara elbowed him, but said, was she pretty? What was her name? Asked Aaron. Wren shook his head. Yes, she was very pretty. Her name was... Let me think. Her name was Iris. Some young ruffians had gathered round her on the street outside the Tipsy Goblin and seemed to be harassing her. She was obviously trying to get back, but they had closed in around her. I approached and called out to her, Lady, are these boys troubling you? She looked at me and nodded while one of the ruffians sized me up and said, what's it to you? We're just making small talk and arranging a business deal. It looks as though the lady doesn't care for your business, said I. The lady? Said one of them. The lady? You know as well as we do that Iris here is no lady. Lady or not, said I, she is not in the mood for your attentions, and I will thank you to move on. We're 4 and you're 1, said the leader. Make us. If that is your wish, I said. I had been walking towards them the whole time we were talking, was close enough to hit the leader. His fists came up to block his face, but I didn't swing at him. I hooked his ankle with my foot. He lost his balance and fell to the dirt street. The other 3 were on me in a moment, one from behind, and I was sorely pressed to defend myself. They were pummeling me quite well. I fell to the ground on top of one of them, kneeing him in the stomach as we went down. The others pulled me off, and one pinned my arms. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that a crowd had gathered, and I was watching intently. I turned my head to avoid a blow and saw 2 of my friends running towards us. Unhand him, shouted my friend Will. That distracted the one pinning me. I stomped his foot hard, and he let go. I turned and tripped him just as my friends ran up. From then on, it was a brawl, each of us trying to hold our own. Suddenly a voice rang out above our struggle. I am Alaric of the Rangers. You boys will cease and desist immediately. Alaric was well known and feared. We stopped. One of the ruffians pulled a dagger at the last instant and stabbed me through my bicep. What? Exclaimed Aaron, Kelly, Shannara, James, Paul, Travis, and Lynette all together. You got stabbed at summer camp? Said James incredulously. Yes, I got stabbed, Wren said, and rolled the sleeve of his t-shirt up to his shoulder, revealing a 2-inch wide scar. Dude, gasped Travis. So what happened next? Asked James. My friends and I got in trouble for fighting. The others got caught and got in trouble too. What about Iris? Asked Kelly. She was gone, said Wren. She must have left as soon as the ruffians turned to me. You weren't kidding when you said you'd defend our honor, were you? Said Shannara. No, I wasn't, said Wren, rolling his sleeve back down. But summer camp? Said Paul. That doesn't sound right for summer camp. Camp is to make you understand and live medieval life, shrugged Wren. Again he took a deep breath. His mug was still in his hand, but it had cooled. He drained it and placed it on the table. I gotta get going. He rose. Lynette rose. The others grabbed their things. They could see he didn't want to talk more, so they just said, "See you tomorrow." Outside, he said, "Don't tell anyone. I mean, just don't say anything." His friends nodded and left. Kelly and Paul on his motorcycle, since they lived near each other, and the others in their cars. Ren and Lynette walked in silence for a block, and then Lynette said, "That really happened, didn't it?" Ren just looked at her. She stammered a bit. I mean, I wasn't sure at first if you were just pulling their legs, but from their reaction, "Yes, it's true," said Ren. "Why'd you doubt me, especially after showing everyone that scar?" "I'm sorry, Celine. I didn't mean to doubt. You're different than your friends, and I'm not always sure what to make of that." "I'm not sure either," said Ren. Thursday was cloudy, with a bit of an early fall drizzle. Ren walked to school anyway, carrying Lynette's books while she held an umbrella. "How did you become a nerd?" he asked. "Well, I didn't know I was one at first. I just knew I loved mythology, legends, fairy tales, and fantasy. My preferred clothing style came from there, too." She shrugged and glanced down at the bodice she was wearing. Ren nodded. "Where'd you get the bodice? Ren Fair? And why wear it with jeans?" "I made it." "You made it?" "Sure. I learned to sew so I could make my own clothing. Most stores don't have my style. I do like jeans, though, so why not mix and match? You're wearing a Renaissance shirt with your jeans." "Yeah, you're right," said Ren. "These older style shirts are just really comfortable." "I don't sew, though. I got this at a Ren Fair 2 years ago." "It's a good shirt," agreed Lynette. "Did you always wear these clothes?" "Not as much, but I did wear them from time to time." "And your friends?" "They will for Ren Fairs or costume parties, but not otherwise." "So you're kind of weird?" asked Lynette. "Yes, but people are used to it. I've always been the weird kid in town." "Then I guess I'll fit right in," said Lynette, laughing a bit. "Well, let's just say that no one is surprised you're hanging out with me," Ren responded.